3 months passed before Henry Cole finally reached New Montana. The colony was everything he had hoped it would be. Rolling hills covered with alien grasses that turned golden in the afternoon light. Clear streams that wound through valleys where earth vegetables grew alongside native plants. Small communities of settlers who had come to the frontier seeking the same thing he sought: peace. His farmhouse sat on a small plot of land at the edge of the main settlement. It was nothing fancy, just 2 rooms with basic utilities and a porch that faced the western mountains. The previous owner had left behind some furniture and a collection of gardening tools that had seen better days. Henry repaired what he could and replaced what he could not. He spent his mornings working the soil, planting seeds he had brought from Earth. Tomatoes, peppers, beans. The work was hard on his aging body, but he welcomed the honest exhaustion it brought. His hands, which had taken so many lives, now coaxed life from the ground. There was something healing in that transformation. The scars from his battle with Commander Thax had faded to pink lines that joined the older marks on his skin. His left arm would never be as strong as it once was, and cold weather made his joints ache more than before. But he was alive, and that seemed like enough. The colonists treated him with casual friendliness, the way frontier people treated all newcomers. They did not know who he was or what he had done. To them, he was just Henry, the quiet old man who grew vegetables and sometimes helped repair equipment with skills that seemed surprisingly advanced for a retired farmer. Captain Morgan had kept her promise. The official reports from the Horizon Drift incident mentioned only that a former military veteran had helped defend the passengers during a Vrexian raid. No names were included. No details were provided. The Grey Wolf remained dead, a legend from a war that most people were trying to forget. Kira Santos arrived on New Montana 6 weeks after Henry. She had been assigned to the colony's medical center as planned, but she had also made a personal decision during her recovery from the ordeal on the Horizon Drift. She wanted to stay close to the old man who had saved everyone on that ship. Not out of debt, but out of genuine affection for someone she had come to respect. She visited his farm on her days off, bringing supplies and company. They would sit on his porch and watch the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Sometimes they talked about simple things: the weather, the crops, the small dramas of colony life. Other times they sat in comfortable silence. 2 people who had seen the worst of what the galaxy could offer and appreciated the peace they had found. One evening, Kira asked Henry why he had really been traveling to New Montana. She said that a man with his skills could have found comfortable retirement on any of the inner worlds. He could have lived in luxury, surrounded by people who would have taken care of his every need. Instead, he had chosen a frontier colony, where life was hard and resources were limited. Henry thought about her question for a long time before answering. He told her that the inner worlds reminded him too much of what he had been. He said that every military base, every government building, every news report about galactic politics brought back memories he was trying to leave behind. He told her that he had come to New Montana because it was as far from his past as he could get without leaving human space entirely. She asked if it was working. He said that some days were better than others. Children from the colony began to visit his farm. They were fascinated by the old man who knew so much about plants and animals and the way things worked. He taught them how to identify edible berries and how to read the weather from the movement of clouds. He showed them how to build simple machines from salvaged parts and how to repair equipment that everyone else had given up on. One of the children, a boy named Peter, who was curious about everything, asked Henry if he had ever been a soldier. The question came without warning, triggered by something the boy had seen in the way Henry moved or spoke. Henry looked at the child for a moment, considering how to answer. He told Peter that he had been many things in his life. He said that he had been a soldier once, a long time ago, when the galaxy was different and humans were fighting for their survival. He said that being a soldier had taught him many things, some good and some bad. He said that the most important thing it had taught him was that fighting should always be the last choice, not the first. Peter asked if Henry had ever killed anyone. The question was innocent, asked with the curiosity of a child who did not yet understand what death really meant. Henry paused. He could have lied. He could have changed the subject. Instead, he told Peter the truth. He said that he had killed many people, more than he could count. He said that every one of those deaths had been necessary to protect someone who could not protect themselves. He said that he did not regret what he had done, but he also did not celebrate it. He told Peter that real warriors did not seek glory or fame. He said that they did what needed to be done and then went home and tried to forget. He said that the hardest part of being a warrior was not the fighting. It was learning to live with yourself afterward. Peter thought about this for a while. Then he asked Henry what he was now, if he was not a soldier anymore. Henry smiled and told the boy that he was a gardener. The seasons changed on New Montana, and Henry's farm began to produce more than he could use himself. He traded vegetables with his neighbors and donated surplus to the community kitchen that fed families during hard times. His reputation in the colony grew, not as a warrior or a legend, but as a kind old man who always had something to share. Sometimes, late at night, he would wake from dreams of blood and violence. He would sit on his porch in the darkness and stare at the stars, remembering faces of people he had killed and people he had failed to save. The nightmares never completely stopped. They were the price of survival, the tax that warriors paid for coming home when so many others did not. On those nights, he would sometimes see Kira walking up the path to his farm. She had learned to sense when he needed company, though he never called her or asked for help. She would sit beside him on the porch, and they would wait together for the sun to rise. One morning, after a particularly difficult night, she asked him if he had any regrets. He told her that he regretted many things. He regretted the lives he had taken. He regretted the years he had spent alone. He regretted not finding peace sooner, but he did not regret what he had done on the Horizon Drift. He did not regret sailing those passengers. He did not regret facing Commander Thax or killing the Vrexians who had come to take innocent people as slaves. He told Kira that some things were worth fighting for, even when you were old and tired and wanted nothing more than to be left alone. He said that protecting the innocent was a duty that never expired, no matter how much he wanted it to. She took his hand and held it. She told him that he was a good man, despite everything he had done and everything he had suffered. He told her that he was just a man who had made choices. Some of those choices had been right. Some had been wrong. In the end, all you could do was try to leave the world a little better than you found it. The sun rose over the mountains of New Montana, casting long shadows across the fields where vegetables grew in neat rows. Henry Cole watched the light spread across his small piece of the galaxy and felt something like contentment settle in his chest. He was an old man now, with nothing left to prove and no one left to fight. The wars were over. The hunting was done. All that remained was the simple work of living, day by day, until his time finally came. And when that day arrived, he would face it the same way he had faced everything else. Without fear, without regret, with the quiet dignity of a warrior who had earned his rest. But for now, there were seeds to plant and vegetables to grow and children to teach. There was peace to enjoy and sunsets to watch and friends to share them with. For Henry Cole, the gray wolf of Earth, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Commander Thax moved first, swinging his curved blade in an arc that should have separated Henry's head from his shoulders. The strike was fast, powered by muscles that had been developed over decades of combat on dozens of worlds. Any normal human would have died in that first second. Henry was not a normal human. He had been reading his opponent's body language before the fight even began, watching the way Thax shifted his weight and tensed his shoulders. He knew the attack was coming before Thax's arm began to move. He stepped inside the arc of the blade, too close for the weapon to do any damage, and drove his elbow into the soft tissue beneath the commander's ribs. Thax grunted in surprise and swung his free arm in a backhanded blow that caught Henry across the side of his head. The old man staggered but did not fall. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, partially blinding him on his left side. He wiped it away with his sleeve and reset his stance. The passengers watched in silence. Even the children had stopped crying, their eyes fixed on the impossible scene before them. An old man with gray hair and a limp was fighting a Vrexian warrior twice his size, and he was still standing. Thax attacked again, more cautiously this time. He had expected an easy kill, but the human was proving more difficult than his appearance suggested. The commander used his reach advantage to keep Henry at a distance, slashing and stabbing with patterns designed to overwhelm any defense. Henry did not try to block the attacks directly. His aged bones would have shattered under the force of those blows. Instead, he deflected and redirected, using Thax's own momentum against him. Every time the commander overextended, Henry made him pay with strikes to vulnerable points. The throat, the joints, the eyes. Neither fighter spoke. Words were useless now. Only skill and will mattered in this final contest. Danny Webb had regained consciousness and watched from the corner of the cargo bay, where he had been left with the other captured security officers. He remembered how he had dismissed Henry as just another old passenger, how he had told the man to go back to his cabin where it was safe. Shame burned in his chest as he watched the old man do what Danny and his entire team had failed to do. The fight continued for 5 minutes, then 10. Henry was slowing down, his movements becoming less precise as exhaustion and blood loss took their toll. Thax sensed the change and pressed his advantage, driving the human backward with a relentless series of attacks. A blade finally found its mark. Thax's weapon sliced across Henry's left arm, cutting deep into the muscle. Henry dropped to one knee, his face gray with pain. The passengers gasped, and Kira Santos had to force herself not to run to him. Thax stood over his wounded opponent and allowed himself a moment of triumph. He told Henry that the legends of the Grey Wolf had been exaggerated. He said that the famous human warrior was nothing but a broken old man who should have stayed hidden. Henry looked up at the commander and said something that made Thax hesitate. He told the Vrexian that the Grey Wolf had never been about strength or speed. He said that the soldiers who had earned that name understood something the warriors like. Thax would never comprehend. Thax asked what that something was. Henry answered by attacking. He surged upward from his kneeling position with every remaining ounce of strength in his body. His right hand, which had been hidden behind his back, now held the combat knife he had taken from his luggage at the start of the boarding. The blade that had been with him through 3 wars and countless missions. The blade that had saved more lives than he could count. The knife found the gap between the scales on Thax's neck, sliding through with the precision of a surgeon's instrument. The commander's eyes went wide with shock as he felt the cold metal pierce his flesh. He tried to swing his blade, but his arm would no longer obey his commands. Henry held the knife in place and spoke quietly into his opponent's ear. He told Thax that the Grey Wolf understood that fighting was not about winning. It was about protecting those who could not protect themselves. It was about being willing to give everything, including your life, for people who would never know your name. Thax sank to his knees, the blade still embedded in his throat. His yellow eyes lost their focus, and his breathing became shallow and wet. He had been defeated not by superior strength or speed, but by a depth of purpose that he had never possessed. Henry withdrew the knife and stepped back. He addressed the remaining Vrexian soldiers in their own language, his voice carrying despite his wounds. He gave him a choice. They could continue fighting and die like their commander, or they could return to their ship and leave with their lives. The soldiers looked at their fallen leader, then at the old human who had defeated him. They looked at each other, fear and uncertainty written across their scaled faces. Their commander was dead. More than half their raiding party was dead. And the human who had killed them all was still standing, still ready to fight. One by one, they lowered their weapons. Henry nodded and told them to collect their dead and leave. He warned them to tell their people what had happened here. He said that humans were not prey, and any Vrexian who forgot that lesson would be reminded in the same way. The soldiers moved quickly, gathering the bodies of their fallen comrades and carrying them back toward the boarding hatches. None of them looked at the passengers. None of them spoke. Within 15 minutes, the last Vrexian had left the horizon drift, and the sound of the raiding ship detaching echoed through the hull. Henry watched them go, his body swaying slightly as the adrenaline that had kept him functioning began to fade. The knife slipped from his fingers and clattered on the deck. His vision blurred, and his legs finally gave out beneath him. Kira reached him before he hit the floor. She caught his weight and lowered him gently, calling for medical supplies and assistance. Other passengers rushed forward to help, their fear replaced by desperate hope that the old man who had saved them would survive his wounds. Captain Morgan knelt beside Henry and took his hand. She told him that help was coming and that the distress signal had been received. Earth Command was sending a military escort to meet them. They were safe because of him. Henry looked up at her with eyes that were growing distant. He asked her to do something for him. He asked her to leave his name out of the official reports. He said that the Grey Wolf died 50 years ago and that he wanted to keep it that way. She started to protest, to tell him that he deserved recognition for what he had done. He interrupted her with a slight shake of his head. He told her that he did not want medals or ceremonies. He just wanted to be Henry Cole, a tired old man going to the frontier to grow vegetables. Danny Webb pushed through the crowd and knelt on Henry's other side. His face was wet with tears as he apologized for dismissing the old man, for not listening when Henry had tried to help. He said that he had been arrogant and foolish and that people had died because of his mistakes. Henry told Danny that guilt was a heavy burden to carry. He said that the young man should learn from what happened and become better because of it. He said that everyone makes mistakes, but only the wise learn to grow from them. Kira worked on his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding and stabilize his condition until proper medical care could arrive. She told him to stop talking and save his strength. He smiled at her and said that he had been saving his strength for 50 years. He figured it was time to spend some of it. The passengers began to gather around, parents holding their children close, couples clutching each other with relief. They looked at the old man on the floor with a mixture of gratitude and awe. Some of them cried. Others simply stared, unable to process what they had witnessed. An elderly woman pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Henry. She was crying openly, her aged hands trembling as she reached for him. She told him that she had served as a nurse during the Vrexian Wars. She said that she had treated Night Reapers who had been wounded in combat, and she had always wondered what had happened to them after the war ended. Henry looked at her and recognized something in her eyes. He told her that most of them did not survive long after the peace. He said that warriors trained for endless conflict do not adapt well to quiet lives. He said that he had been one of the lucky ones. She asked him how he had survived, when so many others had not. He told her that he had found something worth living for. He had found a reason to put down his weapons and walk away. He did not explain what that reason was, and she did not ask. Some things were too personal to share, even with fellow survivors. The military escort arrived 3 days later and escorted the Horizon Drift to the nearest station for repairs and medical treatment. Henry Cole was transferred to a proper medical facility. where surgeons repaired his wounds and doctors marveled at the punishment his body had absorbed. When they asked him how he had survived, he told them that stubbornness ran in his family. Henry found the engineering section guarded by 3 Vrexian soldiers who had been left behind to monitor the ship's systems. They were nervous, their eyes constantly scanning the shadows as reports of missing comrades continued to reach them. Fear had already done half of Henry's work for him. He used that fear. He threw a metal container down a side corridor, and when 2 of the soldiers went to investigate the sound, he dropped from the ceiling vent onto the 3rd. The soldier was dead before his body hit the floor. The other 2 returned to find their comrade gone and a blood trail leading into the darkness. They called for reinforcements, but the reinforcements were dealing with their own problems elsewhere on the ship. Henry left them alive, but unconscious, stripped of their weapons and communications equipment. He needed to move quickly now, and dead bodies would only slow him down. He entered the main engineering control room and found 3 crew members hiding behind a console. They were young technicians, barely out of their training programs, and they looked at him with the wide eyes of people who had never expected to face death. He calmed them with a voice that carried authority without harshness. He told them that he needed their help and that their skills could save everyone on the ship. He asked if they could access the environmental systems from this console. The senior technician, a young woman named Carol Reed, nodded slowly and asked what he wanted her to do. Henry explained his plan. The environmental systems controlled the atmosphere throughout the ship, including the temperature, humidity, and air pressure. More importantly, they controlled the coolant circulation for the ship's power core. If that coolant was vented into specific corridors, it would create a dense fog that would reduce visibility to almost nothing. Humans could navigate by memory and touch. Vrexians relied heavily on their sight. Carol's hand shook as she worked the console, but she followed his instructions precisely. Within minutes, the forward corridors began to fill with white vapor that rolled through the passages like clouds descending from mountains. The Vrexian soldiers stumbled through the fog, firing their weapons at shadows and sounds that turned out to be nothing. Henry moved through the fog as if it did not exist. He had trained for exactly these conditions decades ago, learning to fight blind in environments where sight was useless or dangerous. His other senses guided him now. The sound of Vrexian footsteps heavier than human feet. The smell of their scaled skin, a faint reptilian musk that they could not hide. The vibration of their movements through the deck plates. He eliminated 6 more soldiers in the fog. Each encounter was brief and decisive. He appeared from the whiteness, struck without warning, and disappeared before the dying soldier could alert his companions. The Vrexians began to panic, firing at each other in the confusion. Their discipline breaking down as terror. Replaced training. Henry paused in a junction between corridors and allowed himself 30 seconds of rest. His body was failing him faster than he had hoped. The exertion was too much for his aging heart, and he could feel his pulse becoming irregular. His left arm had gone numb from a blow he had taken during the last fight, and he suspected that one of his ribs was cracked. He closed his eyes and remembered why he was doing this. The faces of the passengers in the cargo bay. The children crying for their parents. The families being torn apart by soldiers who saw them as nothing more than cargo. He had seen the same horror 50 years ago, and he had sworn then that he would never stand by and watch it happen again. The rest ended. He moved forward. Commander Thax received reports from his surviving soldiers and felt his confidence crumbling. More than half of his boarding party was dead or missing. The ones who remained were scared, jumping at every sound, refusing to enter the fog-filled corridors without direct orders. This was not how raids were supposed to proceed. Humans were supposed to surrender. They were supposed to be easy prey. He grabbed a frightened young soldier and demanded to know what was happening. The soldier stammered that something was hunting them, something that moved through the ship like a ghost and killed without warning. He said that they needed to leave before they were all dead. Thax struck the soldier hard enough to knock him to the floor. He would not retreat from a single human, no matter how skilled. He ordered his remaining soldiers to form a defensive perimeter around the cargo bay and to shoot anything that moved in the corridors beyond. He announced through the ship's communication system that he was done playing games. His voice echoed through every speaker on the horizon drift. He told the Grey Wolf that the hunt was over. For every minute that the human remained hidden, one passenger would die. He was not bluffing. He grabbed the nearest human, a teenage boy who had been separated from his family, and put a blade to his throat. In the fog-filled corridors, Henry heard the announcement and stopped moving. The teenager's frightened voice came through the speakers, begging for someone to help him. The boy's mother screamed from somewhere in the cargo bay, calling her son's name over and over. Henry calculated his options. He was still too far from the cargo bay to intervene before Thax carried out his threat. The corridors between his position and the hostages were now filled with alert soldiers who were expecting him. A direct assault would be suicide, and even if he survived, he might not reach the boy in time. He made a decision that went against every instinct he had developed over decades of covert operations. He opened a communication channel to the cargo bay and spoke directly to Commander Thax. He told the commander to let the boy go. He said that the Vrexian wanted to fight the Grey Wolf, and the Grey Wolf was prepared to give him that fight. One-on-one. The old way. Winner takes the ship. Thax laughed at the offer. He asked why he would risk single combat when he held all the advantage. He pressed the blade harder against the boy's throat, drawing a thin line of blood. Henry responded with words that changed everything. He recited the Vrexian Code of Honor in their own language, using phrases that he had learned during the war. He challenged Thax's courage in front of his own soldiers. He called the commander a coward who hid behind children because he was afraid to face a single old human. The Vrexian soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Honor meant everything in their culture. A commander who refused a formal challenge would lose the respect of his warriors forever. Thax felt their eyes on him and understood that he had been trapped by his own traditions. He released the boy and pushed him toward the other hostages. He accepted the challenge and ordered his soldiers to stand down until the combat was concluded. He would kill this human himself and restore his honor in front of witnesses. Henry emerged from the fog-filled corridor into the clear air near the cargo bay. The passengers saw him for the first time since the boarding began, and many of them did not recognize the old man who had kept to himself throughout the voyage. He walked with his limp more pronounced than before, and blood stained his shirt from wounds he had received during his campaign through the ship. Captain Morgan watched him approach and felt something she had not expected. Hope. Kira. Santa saw the exhaustion in his face and the pain in his movements, and she wanted to run to him and tell him to stop. He was too old for this. He was too hurt. He would die if he fought the massive Vrexian commander. But she did not move, because she understood something in that moment. This was what Henry Cole had been born to do. This was who he truly was, beneath the quiet exterior and the paper books and the desire for peace. He was a warrior, and warriors did not stop fighting until the battle was won or their hearts stopped beating. Commander Thax stepped forward to meet him, blade in hand, yellow eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. The old human was barely standing. This would not take long. Henry looked up at his opponent and smiled. It was not the smile of a man who expected to die. It was the smile of a man who had faced death so many times that it no longer held any power over him. The fight began. The maintenance tunnels of the horizon drift were narrow and dark, designed for repair drones rather than human movement. Most people would have struggled to navigate them, But Henry Cole moved through the confined spaces with a familiarity that came from decades of practice in far worse conditions. He had spent his evenings during the voyage studying the ship's blueprints on the public terminals, a habit he had never been able to break, even after 50 years of supposed retirement. His body protested with every movement. His knees ached, his left hip sent sharp pains through his leg, and his lungs burned from the effort of crawling through dusty passages. He was not the young man he had once been. The years had taken their toll in ways that no amount of willpower could fully overcome. But his mind remained sharp, and his hands still remembered the movements they had performed thousands of times before. He emerged from the tunnel into a storage compartment near the forward section of the ship. Two Vrexian soldiers stood guard at the entrance, their backs turned toward him as they watched the main corridor. They were young, probably on their first raid, confident in their strength and in the reputation of their species. They did not expect danger to come from behind. Don Henry picked up a length of metal pipe from a pile of maintenance equipment. It was not an elegant weapon, but it would serve its purpose. He moved without sound, placing each foot with careful precision on the deck plates. The first Vrexian died without knowing he was under attack, the pipe crushing his skull before he could even turn around. The second had time to raise his weapon, but Henry was already inside his reach, driving the pipe into his throat with enough force to collapse his WINDPIP E.2 down. Unknown number remaining. He took the pulse rifle from the first Vrexian and checked its charge. The weapon was designed for larger hands, but Henry had used captured Vrexian weapons before. He adjusted his grip and moved forward through the corridor, stepping over the bodies without looking back. Commander Thax stood in the cargo bay doorway, surveying the human passengers with the satisfaction of a predator examining trapped prey. He was larger than the other Vrexians, nearly 8 feet tall with scales that had darkened to almost pure black with age. Scars crossed his face and arms, trophies from decades of raids and battles. His soldiers called him the Harvester because of the number of slaves he had delivered to the mining colonies. He ordered his soldiers to begin separating the passengers by age and physical condition. The young and strong would be taken first. The old and weak would be left behind to die on the ship. There was no profit in feeding mouths that could not work. The passengers wept and begged, but their words meant nothing to the Vrexians. The soldiers moved among them with rough hands, pulling families apart despite their screams. A father tried to fight when they grabbed his daughter, and a Vrexian blade opened his chest before he could throw a single punch. His wife fell beside him, holding his body as blood spread across the deck. Captain Morgan watched from the corner where she had been forced to kneel. Her mind raced through possibilities, but every option led to the same conclusion. They were helpless. There was nothing she could do to save her passengers. Then her communication device crackled with a voice she did not recognize. The voice was calm and quiet, speaking in short sentences that carried absolute certainty. It told her to keep the passengers calm and to be ready to move them when the opportunity came. It told her that help was already on the ship and that she needed to trust what happened next. She looked around the cargo bay, trying to identify the speaker. None of the passengers seemed to be communicating. The voice came again, telling her not to search for him and to simply be ready. In the forward sections of the ship, the first reports of missing soldiers began to reach Commander Thax. A patrol in Section 7 had stopped responding. Another pair in Section 4 had failed to check in. Thax dismissed the reports as communication failures or lazy soldiers neglecting their duties. Human vessels were primitive, and their equipment often interfered with Vrexian technology. But the reports continued. 5 soldiers missing. Then 8. Then 12. Thax ordered a squad to investigate. And when that squad stopped responding after 3 minutes, the first hints of concern appeared in his yellow eyes. He had raided dozens of human vessels, and this was not normal. Humans were soft creatures who surrendered easily and died even more easily. They did not fight back with any effectiveness. Henry moved through the ship like smoke, appearing from ventilation shafts and maintenance hatches in places the Vrexians never thought to guard. He used their weapons against them, turning their own pulse rifles into instruments of their destruction. When the weapons were not available, he used his hands and whatever tools the ship provided. He was 74 years old, and every fight cost him more than it would have cost his younger self. His movements were slower, his reactions less sharp, his recovery time measured in minutes rather than seconds. But experience compensated for what age had taken. He knew where to strike, when to strike, and how to make every action count. He did not waste energy on unnecessary movements or prolonged engagements. Every encounter ended quickly and quietly. The Vrexians began to find their dead arranged in specific patterns. Bodies positioned with their weapons removed, their communication devices destroyed, their eyes left open. The patterns meant something, though most of the younger soldiers did not recognize the message. Commander Thax did. He had been a young warrior during the Vrexian Wars, a junior officer who had survived encounters with Earth's special forces. He remembered the stories that his commanders had told, warnings about humans who did not fight like normal humans. Soldiers who moved through Vrexian vessels like ghosts, leaving only death in their wake. The patterns on the bodies were signatures, calling cards left by a specific unit. The Night Reapers. Humans had called them. The Vrexians had called them something else. A name that translated roughly as the ones who cannot be seen. Thax felt something he had not experienced in decades. Fear. He broadcast a message throughout the ship, speaking in the human language so that his prey could understand. He called out a name that had not been spoken in 50 years, a call sign that had become legend among both humans and Vrexians. Gray Wolf. In the cargo bay. The older passengers looked up with shock on their faces. A woman in her 70s began to cry, her hands covering her mouth. A man who had served in the war decades ago looked toward the ventilation shafts with something like hope in his eyes. Kira. Santos noticed their reactions and asked what the name meant. The old woman told her through her tears that the Gray Wolf was supposed to be dead. He had disappeared after the war and never been seen again. Some said he had died from his wounds. Others said he had simply walked away from everything and everyone he knew. Captain Morgan listened to the broadcast and then looked at her communication device. The voice on the other end had gone silent, but she understood now who had been speaking to her. She understood why he had asked about the ship's layout and weapons. She understood why Danny had made the worst mistake of his life by dismissing an old man with a limp. The Gray Wolf was hunting, and the Vrexians had become the prey. Commander Thax ordered his remaining soldiers to regroup in the main cargo bay. They would use the hostages as shields and force the human to reveal himself. He shouted into the corridors that the killing would stop or the passengers would suffer. Somewhere in the darkness of the ship, Henry Cole heard the threat and changed direction. He had hoped to reduce the enemy numbers further before the confrontation, but the commander had forced his hand. Hostages meant he had to move faster. His joints screamed as he pushed himself toward the cargo bay. His heart pounded harder than it should for a man his age. But he did not slow down. He had made a promise once to protect those who could not protect themselves. That promise had no expiration date. The cargo vessel Horizon Drift moved slowly through the darkness of space, carrying 300 passengers toward the frontier colony of New Montana. The ship was old but reliable, built for long journeys and heavy cargo rather than speed or comfort. Most of the passengers were families seeking new lives on the outer rim, far from the crowded cities of Earth and its inner colonies. Among these passengers was a man named Henry Cole. He was 74 years old. With gray hair cut short and a face marked by deep lines that told stories of decades lived under difficult circumstances. He walked with a slight limp in his left leg, and his hand showed the kind of wear that comes from a lifetime of hard work. He kept to himself most of the time, sitting alone in the observation deck with old paper books that smelled of dust and memory. The other passengers noticed him but did not pay him much attention. He was just another old man traveling to the frontier, probably hoping to spend his final years in peace and quiet. Some of them felt sorry for him because he seemed so alone. Others simply forgot he existed the moment they looked away. Captain Lisa Morgan had commanded the Horizon Drift for 7 years. She was a capable officer who had handled storms, mechanical failures, and difficult passengers with equal calm. But she had never faced real danger, not the kind that came with weapons and hostile intent. The shipping lanes to New Montana were considered safe, and her crew reflected that comfortable reality. They were good at their jobs, but untested in crisis. Danny Webb was the head of ship security. He was 28 years old, tall and strong, with the confidence of a young man who had never been truly challenged. His team consisted of 8 officers who spent most of their time breaking up arguments between passengers and checking cargo manifests. Danny liked his job because it was easy, and because people respected the uniform he wore. 3 weeks into the 6-week journey, the sensors detected an unknown vessel approaching from the port side. The bridge crew watched their screens with curiosity rather than alarm. Encounters with other ships were rare, but not unheard of in these shipping lanes. Captain Morgan opened a communication channel and transmitted the standard greeting. She identified her vessel, stated their destination, and asked the approaching ship to do the same. The response came back in a language that the translation system struggled to process, and when the words finally became clear, the mood on the bridge changed completely. The approaching vessel was Rexian. The Rexians were a reptilian species known throughout the galaxy for their raiding parties. They attacked civilian transports, killed anyone who resisted, and took the survivors as slaves to work in their mining colonies. Earth had fought a war against them 50 years ago, a brutal conflict that had ended in an uneasy peace. But the peace only applied to military vessels and protected territories. Civilian ships in the outer regions were still fair targets according to Rexian custom. Captain Morgan felt her hands begin to shake as she transmitted a distress signal toward the nearest relay station. The signal would take hours to reach anyone who could help, and help would take days to arrive. They were alone. Danny gathered his security team and tried to look confident as he gave them instructions. He told them to arm themselves with the stun weapons from the security locker and to prepare to defend the main corridors. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the fear that he was desperately trying to hide in the observation deck. Henry Cole closed his book and looked out the window at the approaching Rexian vessel. It was a Predator-class raider designed for speed and boarding operations. He had seen ships like that before, a long time ago in a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. He watched the crew members running through the corridors with their inadequate weapons and their inexperienced movements, and he felt something cold settle in his chest. He found Danny near the main airlock and asked him a simple question. He wanted to know how many hostiles they were expecting and what defensive measures were in place. Danny looked at the old man with barely concealed irritation and told him to go back to his cabin where it was safe. He said that security would handle the situation and that passengers should stay out of the way. Henry nodded slowly and did not argue. He had learned long ago that young men rarely listened until circumstances forced them to. Kira Santos was a nurse traveling to New Montana to work in the colony's medical center. She was 32 years old with kind eyes and a gentle manner that made people trust her immediately. She had noticed Henry during the voyage because he was always alone and because there was something in his stillness that seemed different from simple loneliness. When the alarm sounded and passengers were ordered to gather in the cargo bay, she found herself standing near him. She asked if he was afraid. He looked at her for a long moment before answering that fear was useful if you knew what to do with it. She did not understand what he meant, but something in his voice made her feel slightly less terrified. The Vrexian ship locked onto the horizon drift with magnetic clamps, and the sound of metal grinding against metal echoed through the hull. Captain Morgan made one final attempt at negotiation, offering cargo and supplies in exchange for safe passage. The Vrexian commander responded with a single word that the translation system rendered as unacceptable. They wanted the passengers. Danny and his security team took positions in the main corridor as the boarding hatches began to burn with cutting torches. 8 men and women with stun weapons faced doors that would soon open to reveal warriors bred for violence and conquest. Danny told his team to hold the line and to remember their training. None of them had ever fired their weapons at a living target. The first door fell inward, and the Vrexians poured through like water through a broken dam. They were 7 feet tall with scales that ranged from dark green to almost black. Their eyes were yellow and without mercy. They carried pulse rifles and curved blades that gleamed under the Koro lights. The fight lasted less than 3 minutes. Danny watched his team fall one by one, stunned or struck down by enemies who moved faster than anything he had imagined. 3 of his officers died in those 3 minutes. The rest were captured, including Danny himself, who was knocked unconscious by a blow he never saw coming. In the cargo bay, the passengers heard the sounds of battle fade into silence. Children cried against their parents, and adults prayed to whatever gods they believed in. They knew what was coming. They knew that the Vrexians would come for them next, and that there was no one left to stop them. Henry Cole stood at the back of the cargo bay and listened to the crying and the prayers. He looked at the families holding each other and the young people trying to be brave for those who depended on them. He thought about the quiet retirement he had been seeking, the small farm on New Montana where he had planned to grow vegetables and read his books until death finally found him. Then he removed his jacket and handed it to Kira, who gasped when she saw the scars that covered his arms and disappeared beneath his shirt. Decades of violence written on his skin in white lines and puckered tissue. She asked him what he was going to do. He told her that he was going to keep a promise he had made a long time ago. Before she could ask what promise, he had already disappeared into a maintenance shaft that no one else had noticed. The passengers did not see him go. They only knew that somewhere in the ship, something was about to change.